Hi, I'm Andrew McCrae. Welcome to our farm and ranch in northwest Missouri. My great-great-grandfather settled here in 1910, and I'm the fifth generation to grow crops and livestock here. As a farmer myself, I know the highs and lows of this life, the issues we confront every day, some new, some as old as farming itself. This show is a place to talk with farmers and others in the ag industry about topics that mean something to us, topics that can improve the present and future of our operations. This is Farming the Countryside. Lisa Peterson joins me from Osage, Iowa, and Lisa is in northern Iowa. If you're not familiar with where Osage is, Lisa, good to visit with you again, and maybe we should talk about the weather first of all, because I know southern Minnesota and northern Iowa had lots of rain earlier in the year. What was the experience this year on your farm?
Well, we were pretty fortunate, actually, to get enough timely rains, but not too much early on. We did have a cold, wet spring. Some planting started early April for some of the bigger farmers around us, and the soil temps were cold. But we missed some of those big gully washers of those 5-6 inches at one time. We did have some localized flooding. I'm about 3 miles from the river. So if we got the floods from the river here, it'd be a biblical flood. So we were fairly fortunate that way. But yeah, we feel fortunate we got enough rain to make up for the drought and eliminate our extreme drought status from the previous year. But we got our crops in probably about mid-May. So we're a hair bit later on the corn than we would have liked.
Yeah, you went from dry to wet really quickly, didn't you, up there?
We did. I was watching the weekly. I was curious how long it would take for us to get out of the red in the drought monitor. And, each week we got just a color better. Typically, it looked like through those kind of 6 weeks of spring there. So thankful to have been caught up, and then we were fairly dry here in the last couple of weeks. We actually caught a nice 3-inch rain yesterday in the last 24 hours. So we had an inch in the morning and then another couple inches at night. So that makes us very happy right now. Everybody today at the local co-op elevator customer appreciation dinner was saying it was the $1 million rain. And I'd have to agree with them on that.
Well, $1 million rain, but that does make me think, where was the crop before this? Because southern Minnesota, we hear reports of how far under their average are you. Are you going to be at average, or do you even have a shot at above average of your yield this year?
I would expect average to a hair above. I'd say all of our fields are within about 4 miles of the home place. And you can definitely see a difference. We've struggled from east to west. Our east field was wetter than our farthest west. So that one's going to be a hair under. We didn't have great emergence this spring with the wet. But I think we're probably going to be average. So we cannot complain after last year struggling with extreme drought.
So this year you did have, of course, a lot of rain, a lot of cold. The crop went in late, and you're someone out there that's not only farming, but you're working with other farmers through, some of your roles as you wear your ag hat there in the industry. So any things that you've learned, any things that worked well or not so well this year that you'll carry forward with you?
I think for us, my husband works for a major manufacturer, so we're always going to use fungicide no matter what. I know that has changed for some folks this year, and I think, we have a good crop out there. I'm sad to see that some folks have given up on it, given the prices that we're at. But I think it's well worth the money, and we will continue to do that. It's interesting as you talk to farmers, there's a little bit of everything out there of, well, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing to, well, we need to really make some changes.
Yeah, of course, times are tighter, prices are lower. As you're talking to people, or maybe it's your own experience, where are people going to tighten up? Or are they still willing to spend because they want to get the yield and, hey, we'll just get more yield, but we'll get less for it. But that's how we're going to attack this. And what are you hearing out there?
Well, I wish I had that crystal ball, because all the manufacturers and companies that I work with, as well as, I work with Pivot Bio, we would all love to know that. What's that next 3 months going to look like from a farmer? I think we might see some delayed, from what I'm hearing, maybe some delayed decision making of just trying to see where the markets are going to go. And maybe not buying inputs as early. But yet there's also, on the other hand, there's some that are like, we've got to keep going and doing what we're normally doing. I don't want to give up on a crop, but we might look at our fertility and say, well, we can steal and probably rob a little bit for a year, maybe, to try to see if that helps get by. We obviously can't push on nitrogen, but our P and K, we have high fertility levels. We've pushed it the last 5-10 years. So we might be able to tighten that a little bit. And I think we'll probably, you push the number and the numbers and the pencils a little tighter than you do in previous years. But that's unfortunately agriculture is cyclical, and we've seen this before and we've gotten through it before.
Maybe you don't have any recent data on this, but land sales, rental rates, is this impacting that yet? Or is there enough money out there that's been kind of banked up over the past few years that those are staying strong?
We're seeing a little bit of softening here in the land prices, but not much. The interest rates probably started that more than the commodity pricing. I haven't seen very many sales here in the last month in our area. So I'm not sure what they've done here in the last month, but this summer we're starting to see it soften a little bit.
You mentioned there the biologicals and specifically Pivot Bio there a moment ago. I am curious because on this show we've talked biologicals before, and hey, we use some on our farm and continue to experiment with the best way to do that. Was this the year for it?
As Pivot Bio and the nitrogen, we've seen a lot of nitrogen go through the soil profile and leach down in the soil profile. So that's where I'm happy to have kind of those first 40 pounds of nitrogen on our crop where I know that has not leached from using Pivot Bio. And you can see some of those differences in just staying green, a little bit bigger stalk. So this has definitely been a good year for biologicals, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. I say my own experience is, and I don't wish a bad crop on ourselves, but it seems like that the stress years and perhaps extreme drought or extreme wetness have been the years when that seems to show up as the big benefit. And it sounds like that's what you've experienced as well.
Yep. And I've also noticed that it'll help even out a field. You always have those low spots and less yielding spots, and it seems like we can help even some of that out as well.
Yeah. I'm just curious, other things that you're seeing there in your area this year that have been different. You do finally have the moisture, but you're under tighter times. Are you seeing people operate any differently than they have in the past?
I haven't yet. I think we'll see it more heading into this next year. If you marketed well last year, you had some forward contracting into this year that's helping to help your average. As we head into leaner times. And so I think that was a good idea for folks that hopefully took advantage of some of that last year and looking forward and marketing ahead of year. We did, obviously, like any other farmer will tell you, we didn't do enough of it. We should have done more. But that, unfortunately, is just farming.
Right. One of the things that I wanted to get into is a little bit of your story. And we, I think, have discussed some of that before, maybe on this program. But for those that don't know, you grew up on the family farm. You're back on the family farm. But correct me if I'm wrong, it was never a given that you were coming back to the family farm. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. I would not have told you graduating from high school or college even that there was any chance that I would be back to the family farm. So as far as my story goes, I did graduate with two ag degrees, went into industry, got married, married a Montanan, so not even an Iowa farm boy, married a Montanan who was also involved in agriculture, and just never thought that was going to be a case. When we moved back, we spent some time out of state traveling early jobs. About 14 years ago, we moved back to the state. And we were in Des Moines. When we did that, we started weekend farming on just 160 acres, right? 50-50 split with my mom and dad, and decided, hey, this will be fun. We were coming back anyway to help with harvest. We were always providing labor, and I'm always in the grain cart. So that was just kind of a natural extension. But it was actually my husband's job promotion with Syngenta that moved us home to the family farm. So he started managing all of the sales team for Southern Minnesota. And we looked at that and went, well, we would be 11 miles out of his territory if we moved to the family farm. And my parents had already decided to build a house in town. And so we actually moved into the house that I grew up in. So it was a little surreal to actually move back into your childhood home. And it was actually perfect timing. Our oldest at that point was starting kindergarten. He's now a junior. So we've been back almost 11 years. And it's just been wonderful to be able to join into the operation. So my husband's still working full-time off farm. And I spend a lot of time with my dad. And, my husband's able to take time off and farm as well.
Yeah. You mentioned that you didn't imagine you'd come back and farm. So I'm guessing, though, you've been doing this now at least 11 years. You are enjoying the role of being on the farm in production ag. Is that right?
I am. Every day is different. And I think that's one of the things I enjoy is the challenge of something's different every day. Every year is different of the cropping system and what's going to happen. My dad's almost 83 and we're looking at doing some major changes to our farming operation and incorporating strip tilling that we haven't done before. We've been no-till beans, but looking at some major changes. And so that intellectually keeps me challenged and keeps each year, exciting as something different.
Take me back to when you were in high school, and, we aren't that far apart in age. And I think about those times that I think there was a stereotype that if you were going to go into farming, that was something that the young men would go into, and perhaps the young women might be in agriculture somewhere, but not on the farm. Is my perception wrong, or have things changed a lot in the last 30 years? Because, there are a lot of young ladies and women out there in production agriculture now.
I think it's awesome. You are correct. I think in the times when we graduated from high school, it was something that you didn't go to college and you went to the farm, right? If you were going to be in agriculture. And I see more and more now you have a professional side of it where you've gone to college, you maybe have worked in a professional job, and then you're trying to make your way back, right? I consider myself fortunate. Getting into farming is not easy. And honestly, from a capital expenditure, you really need to be able to be in a family and kind of work your way in, right? You can't just decide you want to move to a farm and start farming. We all know that does not work with the expenditure that it takes to start farming. So I'm thankful for that. I never thought that I would be in this kind of situation, but it has been so wonderful. And I'm seeing more and more. I was just at Farm Progress Show and was working with Jenna Ochsner from Nebraska. And right, she was a farm girl, or she wasn't even a farm girl. She married a farm boy, and now is farming in young and actively involved in the operation. So there is more and more women, I would say, that are a part of their operations. And I think some of it too is also, we're just talking about it more, right? I look back, my mom was always an integral piece of the operation, even though she also worked off farm at times. And a lot of women are. It's just maybe sometimes it's been more silent than what it is now.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, your parents you mentioned are getting older, but you are, at least in your family, you are the lead on the production ag side. I mean, your husband's very much involved in agriculture, but I don't know if he has as much time for the actual on-farm piece, correct?
That's true. Spring and fall, he does do all the planting, and I do a lot of the running. So we stick him in the planter. My dad's still, the combine is his spot. So I picked up my CDL about 5 years ago, so I can drive the semi. I'm also in the grain cart a lot of the times. But yeah, and in the government's eyes too, it was kind of funny. You talked about women earlier on the previous question. I kind of had to chuckle because when we were applying for some of the beginning farmer loans, right, when we first started, they questioned me being the lead. And I was like, yeah, I'm the one home here. And they're like, well, most of the time the wife works off farm. And I'm like, no, that would be my husband is working off farm. And I'm the one on the farm at the moment. But it definitely is a partnership with all four of us. And, now my son and kids and the girls are helping as well. It takes everybody to make our farm work.
You and I have had this conversation before, and you have kids in high school. I have kids in high school. I have a daughter that's interested in the farm, but I think she wonders where her place might be. Mm-hmm. How do we talk about farming with our daughters? Because there's still that stereotype out there, and you just mentioned it about your beginning farming loan, but I want her to know that she has just as much right and just as much opportunity to run a tractor and farm like any other person can, if she wants to. She doesn't have to. So do we talk about farming incorrectly sometime with our daughters, or what do we need to do differently because you lived it?
Yeah, I think just exactly what you're saying. I want her to do and to be able to run the tractor, to be able to be out on the farm. My dad was like that as well. I had every opportunity to do what my brother was doing, my sister was doing. Well, my sister didn't care. I was the youngest out of all three. So I was the one making the excuse to be out on the farm with my dad. And be out helping. There's times for me, it's frustrating because physically I don't have the strength that, my dad and my husband have. So that's a challenge for me. I try to make sure, especially during the winter, I'm weightlifting and trying to do some things, 50-pound sacks or seed corn bags are pretty heavy at times. I'm not that big. So, that's probably the biggest thing for me is at times I can fix something or I can help fix something. And, I took shop class in high school because I found it more interesting than home ec. But I don't have the physical strength. So it's learning how to work smarter at times too, and using tools to my advantage. But, it's just, for me, it's, my girls are out as much as they want to be and where their interest is. And, my dad would let me ride with him all the time. He would show me how to change oil in the lawnmower and how to take apart a small engine. And those are just all skill sets along the way of I got to do everything anybody else was.
Your route back to the farm, as you mentioned, took you out of state and you worked in different places and locations for a while. And obviously you look back and say, well, that was the right route for you. But is that a good route for kids that want to come back to the farm, even for those that say right out of high school, I want to come back and farm? Would it be beneficial if they went somewhere else? You did. And you don't know how many times, and maybe you're hearing it too, I hear so many farmers these days say, my kids want to go right into production agriculture, into farming, and I told them they can't come back for X number of years. Is it smart? Is it the thing to do?
I think it really has to depend on the family situation. I appreciate having that outside knowledge. So my bent would be, yes, go do something else so that you see how other people do things, right? You recognize when you leave your farm that maybe the way you're doing it isn't the best, or maybe there's another trick that you can learn from another farmer of how to view something, how to think about something. And so I like that perspective. I think every opportunity that you have and experience you have gains to your wealth of knowledge that you're able to use later on. So for me, it was great to have that experience. But, for others, I think it would have been different had I thought that I was coming back to the farm. Dad made the comment, he goes, if I knew you guys would have been back, I would have been continuing to buy land over those years, right? To expand the operation. We're not big enough at the moment to support 2 full-time families. So hence why we've got to have the off-farm jobs. And it will always be kind of a part-time thing for us. And so that's, that I think if somebody really thinks that they want to do production agriculture in the long term, I should have had those conversations with my dad and and we would have had some different family farm, like long range planning had we known that. Right. But I didn't know if I'd marry somebody in agriculture. I didn't know if I'd marry somebody that would want to farm as well, and let alone get ourselves back here.
The conversation you bring up there is one that I've heard from a lot of different people. If you have kids that you don't know whether they'll come back or not, would it be good to just go ahead and manage the operation as if they are going to come back? You may have more land or equipment than you need, but I guess you would have assets to sell, or it's hard because you're going to outlay a lot of cash and not know what's going to happen in the future. But is there a right or wrong, or how would you suggest somebody handle it?
I think that's a really hard situation because A, you're outlaying a lot of cash, right? And B, it becomes, for my dad, it really became a labor issue. Do you want to hire somebody else? Because you got to the point where it's more than what I can handle, what my wife and I can handle, with some part-time help. So that's really the hard thing, is that we've become the labor, which is really nice and allowed us to work into the operation and continue to buy into the operation. But it's hard. The dollars are just so big, right? That is such a challenge. And land doesn't come open very often. It can be a generation or 2 before a piece right next to you opens up. So you got to make those decisions, the best decision you can, given the situation at that time. And that's so hard to just generalize because it seems like every family's in a little bit different situation.
You mentioned your siblings there earlier, and I think that we like to learn from one another. So I want you to answer this how you want to. And I want to be respectful of people, because I never try to dig into people's business, but yet try to learn from one another.
Yep.
You have siblings that didn't come back to the farm. How do you manage that then going forward? Because obviously you want to keep farming, it sounds like, and you want to keep that land and so forth together. How do those conversations go, and how do you manage that to be fair to people that are still your blood relatives, but you also want to keep this farm moving forward?
Yeah. And to be honest, it was much easier before we came back to the farm. Before we came back to the farm, it was an easy conversation that my husband and I would manage the land, and at some point it gets divided between the 3 of us, right? And it becomes much more of a challenging conversation when we're 11 years in with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And we also have the goal, as my husband and I, is to be able to keep this farmstead together for another generation, right? So at some point, I have to be able to buy out my siblings. But I think where farmers today sometimes struggle, and ours maybe hasn't happened as quickly as we wanted it to, but we've gotten there. And, just trying to find what's right for my parents and what's right for us as siblings. My parents really spent, and kudos to them, they have spent a lot of time trying to figure that out and finally found a professional that they worked with to set up how the trusts work and how the transitions work, and to have those open conversations. I think that's where in agriculture and with these multiple generations, I'm afraid, actually, I was talking to somebody at Farm Progress Show this week that she's like, we don't have a transition plan yet right now. My husband and I are just a W-2 employee. And we've got to have that, allow that older generation and have those conversations of what are your wishes? Because you own the land, right? At that point, they're owning the land. What are your wishes? How do you want to see the farm continuation happen? Thankfully, in my situation and for my husband and I, my parents want to see that farm continuation happen. So in their estate planning documents, they have laid out, here's how it's going to work if we choose to buy out my siblings. And there's some parameters in that give us, that are advantageous to us to be able to buy out the siblings, and that we have first right of refusal to do that. So that allows us, because at some point we probably will farm some full time. We have enough acres that would be, for a family that would be able to make a living on that. So it's challenging. My encouragement would be have the conversations early. It takes a while to get it figured out. Involve a legal professional, because especially with some of the laws and changing, and in a couple of years we sunset some of the estate planning clauses of how much you can pass along tax-free. We've got to be good in agriculture to seek professionals to help us do that. And then you don't have hurt feelings afterwards. My siblings fully know what to expect. We fully know what to expect. And there's a lot of peace in that, because we know kind of that help lay out our roadmap that then we can do our financial planning and estate planning as well.
And hopefully you have siblings that are willing to work with that plan. I feel like I'm fortunate. I live in a family where I think, our family gets along well. But I don't know what else to tell people other than just try to talk through that as early as you can and help one another. Is that all you do? Because you and I both know plenty of places where that hasn't happened.
Yeah, it's awkward at first, right? Because you are talking large amount of dollars, depending on kind of what the family situation is, but it can be very large, and it's awkward because you recognize that, hey, this is challenging. It's a little awkward to talk about. We have to be open and honest about our finances and where we're at. But thankfully, I have two siblings that all along the way recognized, and we've had that conversation and expressed our wishes along the way, even before we were farming, that we wanted the farmstead to stay intact for another generation. I'm third generation on this farmstead. I would love to see the fourth, right? And it gets a lot harder when you split that up in threes. So I can't stress enough. You are exactly right, Andrew. You just got to have the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable. And I'm thankful that I have siblings that agree with my parents' wishes too, to say, hey, yeah, we want to keep this together.
Lisa, I appreciate the time. It's always good to catch up with you. Hopefully the crop will finish well. You've gotten a little rain for the beans here at the end, so maybe that'll make them go ahead and do well as well.
I think you are exactly right. Nice to fill out that August rain helps fill out those soybeans, and we're still filling corn too, so we're thankful for it.
Yeah. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much.